Today we are going to be dividing decimals. So with all of our decimal operations, we have seen that there is a connection to the same way that we do this with whole numbers. So we are going to divide our decimals by using the long division algorithm that we use with whole numbers. So in this problem, I have 1 6/10 divided by 4. So I have 1 6/10 divided by 4. What we're going to do is just place the decimal point in the quotient above the decimal point in the dividend. Essentially, we're just bringing the decimal point up. So here's my decimal point. I'm going to bring it here, and then just divide like we do with whole numbers, and we'll just keep going until there's no remainder. 4 does not go into 1, so put a 0 here. Okay, we're not going to put an X or leave it blank. This shows 4 goes into 1 0 times. Then I'm looking at 16. 4 goes into 16 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. So my quotient is 4/10. Let's try another one. 4 374 thousandths. We are dividing by 12. Here's my decimal point. Going to bring that up. 12 doesn't go into 4, so I'm going to place a 0 here. 12 goes into 43 3 times. And if these were whole numbers, this would be the hundreds place. So this is like saying 12 times 300 is 3,600. Or just think 12 times 3 is 36, and then add these two zeros as placeholders and subtract. Okay, now we're just looking at this next blank space. So I'm just focused on the next blank spot. So if I cover the rest of this up except that blank spot, I'm just looking at 77. And 12 goes into 77 6 times. 12 times 6 is 72. Then we'll subtract. Okay, 12 goes into 54 4 times, and 12 times 4, 48. Subtract again, we get 6. Now, we want an exact answer, so we don't want a remainder. And what we've seen is that if we add a 0 after a decimal point, it doesn't change the value. So what I'm going to do is add a 0, and I'm just going to bring that 0 down and keep going. So now 12 goes into 60 5 times. 12 times 5, there's 60. So here is my quotient. Okay, go ahead and pause your video. Try these 3 at the bottom. And then you can unpause to check your work. Okay, here we go with these 3 at the bottom. All right, we're going to go ahead and turn the page. And we're going to take a look at what happens when we have 2 decimal numbers. So with 2 decimals, we can't divide by a decimal number. We need to change it to a whole number. So this 1 4/10, I need to move that decimal point so that it becomes 14. So then I'm going to move this decimal point, so that becomes 182. So 182 divided by 14 is the same as 18 2/10 divided by 1 4/10. If I move this decimal point once, I move this decimal point once. We see that trend a lot in math. In fractions, what we do to the numerator, we do to the denominator. With equations, what we do to one side, we do to the other. Now I'm going to set this up and just divide like we do with whole numbers. 14 goes into 1 0 times. 14 goes into 18 once. Then we subtract. 14 goes into 42 3 times. 14 times 3, 42. So my quotient is 13. Hey, let's try another one. Over here, we're dividing by 51 hundredths. We need to change this to a whole number. So I'm going to move this once, but it's still a decimal. Twice, now it's a whole number. So now I have 51. So I'm going to have to do the same thing over here. Once, twice. So now we have 45 and 9/10. So 45 and 9/10 divided by 51. I do have a decimal point, so I'm going to place that up here in my quotient. 51 goes into 4 0 times. It goes into 45 0 times. Now we're looking at 459. We do have a larger divisor, so you could make a list of multiples, but in this case, I know 51 times 10 is 510. That's pretty close to 459. So if I work it out, 51 times 9 is 459, and I'm left with no remainder. Here's my quotient. Hey, pause your video and give the 2 at the bottom a try. All right, so number 4, we end up, which is 96 divided by 12 once we move our decimal point. Over here, we move the decimal point once to get 23. So I moved it once here, and it ends up being 216 and 43 hundredths. So I divided that out, and then I just went ahead and make a list of multiples for 23. So I started with 23, added 23, and kept that going. So that now I can see 23 times 9 is 207. 23 times 4 is 92. All right, flip this over, and there is just one more scenario we're going to take a look at. So here I have 2 and 45 hundredths divided by 7 thousandths. We need to make this a whole number, so we're moving that decimal point once, twice, 3 times, so that it's now 7. So over here I have to move once, twice, and I'm going to move it a 3rd time, which means we need to throw a 0 in there. So now it's 2,450 divided by 7. Okay, so 7 goes into 2 0 times. 7 goes into 24 3 times. 7 times 3, 21. Add my zeros, or think 7 times 300 is 2100. Then subtract. Okay, now if I look at the next place value, I'm looking at 35. 7 goes into 35 5 times. 7 times 5 is 35. We're now left with 0, but I still have one place value left. So I'm going to say 7 goes into 0 0 times. So our quotient is 350. Okay, go ahead and pause your video and set up this next one. Okay, make sure you have it set up correctly. It becomes 380 divided by 16. And we probably at least got to this point, 23, and we have 12 left over, but we want an exact answer. So what we know is that if I take 380 and I add a 0.0, 380.0 is the same thing as 380. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Then I'm going to bring this decimal point up and this 0 down, and I'm going to keep dividing. 16 goes into 120 7 times. 16 times 7 is 112. Right? And I still have 8 left over. So I'm going to add another 0 and keep going. Bring that 0 down. 16 goes into 80 5 times. 16 times 5, there's 80. Now we're at 0, so this is our quotient.